find out who won the primaries in North Carolina and beyond.
Who's still in the race for the White House? We break down each of the candidates on both sides.
And don't forget the local scene. A governor's seat, a House seat, and a Senate seat are up for grabs.
These stories and more, Elon Local News Primary Show starts right now.
Good evening and thank you for joining us for ELN's election show. I'm Connor DelPrete.
And I'm Dionne. Today is voting day for the presidential primaries in 5 states, including North Carolina. Polls closed at 7:30 p.m. tonight, and the winners will be announced throughout the night.
But before we dive into the results, our Paul LeBlanc is live in the studio to break down what you need to know about today's elections.
Thanks, Connor. Today is known as Mega Tuesday, the second biggest primary election day behind Super Tuesday, with nearly 50% of delegates on the table. Ohio, Missouri, Florida, Illinois, and North Carolina all voted today, with big consequences for candidates as the general election draws closer. On the Republican side, Missouri, Illinois, and North Carolina award delegates proportionally. The biggest prizes of the night, Florida and Ohio, are winner-take-all states, meaning whichever candidate wins the state gets all the delegates. On the Democratic side, all states are divided proportionally. But what is a delegate? A delegate is a representative sent to vote within either the Democratic or Republican National Party for their presidential candidate to run for president. To win the nomination, the Republican candidate must finish with 1,237 delegates. Businessman Donald Trump enters tonight, leading the GOP primary with 417 delegates. 2,383 delegates are needed to win the Democratic nomination. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton leads with 1,235. We will keep you updated with the results as they continue to come in. Connor and Dionne, back to you.
Thanks, Paul. Coming up after the break, we'll take a more in-depth look into our Republican candidates.
I will not be news today. I will not make another push to be the first man in space with frosted tips and a puka shell necklace. And I will not go viral when my terror is caught on camera when I finally realize that in the vacuum of space, no one can hear you sing. I'm Lance Bass, and I will not be trending today because there is a much bigger story that needs to be heard.
Hey, did you know 2.4 million loving cats and dogs in shelters and rescues need our help to find a home? Let's go to the shelterpetproject.org and meet a few who are in a shelter near you. Harlow, oh, she's one great listener who loves to hear all your stories. My kind of cat. Cerulo is a sweet, goofy boy who's eager to please. Sounds just like another dog I know. So go to the shelterpetproject.org, search your local shelters and rescues, and go for a cuddle with your next best friend. Adopt.
Welcome back to ELN's 2016 primary special.
The results are in. With Donald Trump recently declared the winner of the North Carolina Republican primary, we'll take a more in-depth look into the party's performance this election season.
While North Carolina can carry a say in who will be the next commander-in-chief, the state of Ohio is considered one of the most important states in the race. Tonight, the state's governor and Republican candidate, John Kasich, awaits his fate after gaining recent favor and fervor in the headlines. Our Meredith Stutz breaks down the basics of Kasich.
Do or die for the road to the White House, especially for Republican candidate John Kasich. The Ohio governor is currently serving his second term in the Buckeye State. At 63 years old, Kasich, a Pennsylvania native, is no stranger to public office. He won his first election at 24 in Ohio and spent nearly 20 years in Congress, including becoming chairman of the House Budget Committee. Kasich, by many, is considered to be a more moderate candidate. He's pro-life, but also pro-Common Core. He supports amnesty for undocumented immigrants, but wants to repeal and replace Obamacare. Ever since announcing his candidacy for president in July, Kasich struggled until recently to gain media and voters' attention. Despite having never won a primary to date, Governor Kasich has been able to break from the GOP gaggle with a message of optimism and hope.
We got to have positive solutions in in this country. We can't be running around yelling at one another, going all these crazy things we see on TV.
Before voters cast their final ballots, Kasich continues to stay in last place in the Republican presidential race with 63 delegates. With 66 delegates at stake in Ohio, a winner-takes-all event, Kasich said that should he lose on his home turf, he would drop out of the race. It's often said that the GOP can't win the White House without Ohio, and tonight John Kasich hopes that he can keep that tradition and his candidacy alive. Meredith Stutz, Elon Local News.
North Carolina is not the only state holding primaries today. Florida has just under 100 delegates up for grabs and could have serious implications for a Republican candidate who also calls that state his own. I have more on Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio announced he was running for the Republican presidential nomination in mid-April and has spent most of the primaries thus far battling for second place with Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Rubio currently sits in third place with just over 160 pledged delegates after wins in Minnesota, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico. The Florida senator has been a vocal opponent of the Affordable Care Act and the Iran nuclear deal. He also believes that President Obama needs to expand airstrikes in Syria and Iraq if the United States hopes to conquer the threat of ISIS. Heading into today's primaries, according to a public policy polling report released yesterday, Rubio was trailing the three other candidates in North Carolina with just 7% of the vote. And moving to his home state of Florida, a Quinnipiac University poll released yesterday had Rubio in second place with 22% of the votes. But businessman Donald Trump more than doubles that number heading into today's primary. North Carolina and Florida have the two highest delegate counts at stake today, so a poor showing in both would certainly hurt the Rubio campaign going forward. I'm Connor DelPrete, Elon Local News.
And ahead of Rubio in the race to be the Republican presidential nominee is Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Our Brooke Wivag has more on the candidate.
One thing you might not know about Republican presidential candidate Ted Cruz is that his real name is Raphael. Going into today's primaries, he has only 100 delegates behind opponent and frontrunner Donald Trump. According to CNN, Cruz currently has won 7 states and has 371 delegates of the necessary 1,237 to get the Republican nomination for president. He's worked on a range of issues, including restoring the Constitution, defending Second Amendment rights, and securing the border. While referred to as a conservative hero on Political Insider, Cruz says the first thing he would do after becoming president is undo all of Barack Obama's executive orders, which he calls illegal and unconstitutional. According to a High Point University poll, Cruz was not expected to win the state of North Carolina because he only had 28% of voter support in the state. If elected, Cruz would be the first Latino president and would take on the White House with his wife and 2 daughters. Brooke Wivag, Elon Local News.
Just a quick update. While we continue to receive results, Trump is 42% while Cruz has 32%. Hillary with 61% over Sanders is 35% in North Carolina. Donald Trump has a lead in the Republican delegate count. Our Maya Eaglin is here in the studio to give us the latest update on Trump. Good evening, Maya.
Thanks, Connor. Donald Trump rallies have been making headlines over the past week as protesters and supporters clash in Chicago, Alabama, and other locations throughout the entire campaign. Trump has been vocal in keeping with his controversial views. He says he will defund Planned Parenthood, bring back jobs from China and Mexico, and reform the immigration system by removing millions of undocumented immigrants currently in the United States. He has said that Black Lives Matter, but a stronger police force is critical to the future of America. He's passionate about allowing citizens to have guns and is not supportive of the climate change initiatives. Several polls have Donald Trump as the big predicted winner in the North Carolina primary. Some have Trump's support in the low 30s, while one poll from Survey USA gave him 48%. There are 72 delegates up for grabs in North Carolina, and if Donald Trump wins a majority tonight, he will be that much closer to gaining the nomination for the Republican Party. Already, Trump has won 470 delegates, according to CNN, and tomorrow the numbers will be in to see how he did in NC. At least 1,237 are needed for the nomination, and that's all I have for the latest on Trump. Maya Eaglin, Elon Local News.
With each primary election, it looks more and more likely that Donald Trump will clinch the Republican nomination. Our Alex Hale talks to students on campus to see how they feel about the candidate.
Some students on campus feel Trump is more of an entertainer than a politician. I think Donald Trump is an entertainer, and I'm really struggling to see him as a strong candidate.
And others see him as something else.
He's kind of racist and just not a good person, so I won't be voting for him, that's for sure.
Though there's one thing that students agree upon. Donald Trump seems to be a businessman before a politician.
He's a businessman and not a politician, and I feel like if he became president, our foreign relations would be destroyed.
He is a businessman, and running a country is like a business, but when it comes down to it, he doesn't represent what a president should.
He's a great businessman. He's good at selling himself, but not so much, for I'm not for a lot of what he does.
Alex Hale, Elon, Local News.
And after the break, we take a look at the campaigns of the Democrats running for office.
Bento in 2010 from a shelter. As it turns out, we have very similar personalities. And this cat makes me make art because he's always motivating me to take pictures of him, to draw pictures of him. He just is motivating artistically. It's just that simple. Well, he's my best friend, but a lot of people know him as Keyboard Cat.
Hey, look, it's those guys.
Get some drinks!
Are you good to drive?
I'm fine.
How many did you have?
I should be fine.
You should be?
Go and step out of the vehicle for me.
See ya, buddy. Good luck.
So turns out, buzz driving and drunk driving, they're the same thing, and it costs around $10,000. So not worth it.
Welcome back to ELN's 2016 primary show. With only 2 candidates on the Democratic side, things aren't quite as complicated as with the Republicans. Many Democrats have been feeling the burn, and we aren't talking about the kind that comes from a lack of SPF. I looked into the campaign story of Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is one of the 2 candidates running for the presidency on the Democratic side. Sanders is a 74-year-old husband, father of 4, and U.S. Senator from Vermont. Sanders began his political career as the mayor of Burlington, Vermont in 1981, after life as a carpenter and documentary filmmaker. Sanders has been described as progressive. With a platform based upon justice and equal rights, he is dedicated to bridging the gap between the rich and the poor. His policy proposals include universal health care as a right, raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour, and cutting carbon emissions to combat climate change. One of the stances that students might find appealing is free education at public colleges and universities, as well as his commitment to lower interest rates on student loans. Sanders currently has 580 pledged delegates and superdelegates out of the 2,383 needed to win the nomination. If he wins the North Carolina primary, he will be 170 delegates closer to gaining the Democratic nomination. According to the Elon University poll, 37% of responders who identified as Democrats favored Sanders over his opponent, Clinton. And for those of you curious about the potential first woman president of the United States, our Ashley Boley took a look into the campaign of the former Secretary of State and second Democratic candidate, Hillary Clinton.
She says she's fighting for us. Hillary Clinton's political slogan is gathering eyes across the nation, especially in North Carolina. Presidential primary poll tracking website 538.com says she has over a 99% chance of winning the Tar Heel state. Clinton is one of 2 2016 Democratic presidential hopefuls running against Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. Before she jumped on the campaign trail, in April 2015, she formally announced her candidacy for the 2016 presidential election. Just 6 months before, she was in Charlotte, North Carolina, campaigning for former Democratic U.S. Senator Kay Hagan for the NC midterm election in November 2014.
This election really comes down to a simple question. Who's on your side?
Before she tossed her hat in the race, she was the U.S. Secretary of State from 2008 to 2013, working under President Obama. Creating equal rights for women, defending the Affordable Care Act, raising middle-class incomes, and making college economical.
I don't know why the Republicans
have such a problem with funding public schools to the extent that they should.
Are a handful of her main issues. Ashley Boley, Elon Local News.
And we have another update for you. Currently in North Carolina, Hillary Clinton leads with 38% of the vote, while Bernie Sanders lags behind with 39%.
Now that we've gotten to know all the candidates, we invited student representatives David Mara from Elon's Democratic Club and Matt Corman from the Republican Club to discuss the results live in the studio. David and Matt, thanks for joining us. My first question to you, after seeing those numbers, are there any surprises thus far?
I mean, not necessarily. I feel in North Carolina, for the last few years, it has been a pretty conservative state, though that's starting to change. But at the same time, it's been pretty consistent over the last few elections. So that doesn't surprise me too much.
And I think Hillary was supposed to do well in North Carolina, and she has done well so far. And Donald Trump has done well in Florida and North Carolina as expected. So tonight, I'm not really surprised yet.
And Matt, the Republican Party has Donald Trump leading in most states. He's won a majority of states. So what do you think about his issues concerning students in particular?
Well, I'm not sure exactly about Donald Trump in particular. I know the Republican Party has a better platform for students than the Democrats. If Republicans get elected, there are going to be more jobs available. There are going to be fewer taxes and regulations so that there really will be higher salaries, more jobs, and students will have a lot more choices right out of college than if the Democrats get elected, and they'll just burden us with debt for the rest of our lives.
And David, how about you? Hillary Clinton right now is leading in North Carolina. How are her issues concerning college students for you?
Well, I feel a lot of students are still caught up about the whole email Benghazi scandal. I think that's something that's really hurt her chances, because if you take a step back a few months before, it looked like she was the clear front runner, but that's clearly not the case now with Bernie Sanders. And I think Bernie Sanders is the biggest issue for Hillary Clinton when you take into account college students, because college students have shown a lot of interest with Bernie Sanders. So he's taking a lot of voters away from Hillary Clinton. So I think that's the biggest barrier.
Alrighty, and now that we've gone through a little bit about both candidates, who do you support?
Honestly, I was talking to a friend earlier today, and I was going to go vote in the primaries. And the second I step up to the booth, I'm almost torn, because in a way, I think Hillary Clinton has a better chance of winning because she can cater more towards the voters in the middle between Republicans and Democrats versus somebody like Bernie Sanders, who caters more to very strong liberals. Even, a lot of people call him a socialist. So it's hard to imagine Republicans voting for somebody like that.
And Matt, who do you support?
I support Senator Ted Cruz for three reasons, really. One is his plan for tax reform. Two is regulatory reform. And three is his adherence to the Constitution. So I think he's the best candidate in my eyes.
And I have a question for you, Matt. There have been talks about if Donald Trump wins this presidential nomination, when it comes to the general election, Republicans that don't support Trump may either not vote or they may vote for a Democrat. Is there a chance that they could actually vote for an independent like Gary Johnson?
I think there's a chance, but we have to take a step back and let the voters play out the process. And we have to see what all the voters who haven't voted yet have to say. So I think there's always a chance for anything to happen, but we have to let it play out.
All right, well, Matt and David, thank you so much for joining us in the studio. Elon Local News will continue its coverage of the primaries throughout the race. The last district to elect delegates is Washington, D.C. for the Democrats on June 14th.
And tonight, stay tuned, because coming up after the break, we have all you need to know about the local elections.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes? B, console her?
Don't worry, sweetie. This is gonna happen a lot.
Or C, find her a new boyfriend?
Nice, single boys. That was weird.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
Hey, you.
Yeah, you.
getting that college education. What are you gonna do? Graduate and take some office job? Be like everybody else? Or will you dare do something different? Like be a teacher. You could be my teacher. You got the skills. The smarts? Yes, you. You could be the teacher I never forget. That'd be cool. Does that corporate job even have recess? What are you gonna make of yourself? What are you gonna make of me?
Quick election update. The AP has called Hillary Clinton to win North Carolina. Moving into local politics, North Carolina has quite a few seats up for election, including Senate, Governor, Attorney General, and more. Senators running for election on the Democratic side include Kevin Griffin, Ernest Reeves, Chris Wray, and Deborah Ross. Republicans include incumbent Richard Burr, Greg Bannon, Larry Holmquist, and Paul Wright. Finally, Sean Hall is running for Libertarian for the Senate seat.
The governor's seat is up for election. Democratic candidates include Ken Spalding and Roy Cooper. On the Republican side, incumbent Pat McCrory will face competition from Charles Kenneth Moss and C. Robert Brawley.
Here with a breakdown of what local North Carolinians need to know, we have Paul LeBlanc back in the studio. Hey, Paul.
Thanks, Connor. On the local level, North Carolina voters will be deciding on candidates for governor, the U.S. Senate, and the House of Representatives primary will be held on June 7th. In the gubernatorial race, incumbent Republican Governor Pat McCrory faces Democratic challenger North Carolina Attorney General Roy Cooper. In the Senate primary, incumbent Republican Richard Burr faces Democratic challenger and former State House Majority Whip Deborah Ross in the U.S. House of Representatives primary. We will keep updating you on the winners of these elections as the results continue to come in.
Governor Pat McCrory is up for election in November, and today is the gubernatorial primary, also known as election for governor. Our Gary Grumbach gives us a look at the incumbent.
Pat McCrory is the governor of North Carolina, running for re-election in today's Republican primary. But how'd he get here? McCrory served as the mayor of Charlotte from 1995 to 2009. During his campaign for governor in 2012, he campaigned as a strict conservative, gaining support from the Tea Party. Political analyst Nate Silver named him the 9th most conservative governor in the country in 2013. Economically, McCrory opposes higher taxes on the wealthy, supports the expansion of free trade, and opposes the idea that a stimulus is better than a market-led recovery. Socially, McCrory opposes abortion, favors military expansions, and favors medical marijuana. McCrory's stance on sanctuary cities made national news earlier this year. A bill McCrory signed prohibits any North Carolina county or municipality from restricting local law enforcement's ability to cooperate with federal immigration officials.
Well, there were 5 sanctuary cities until we passed the law, and I signed it as governor of the 9th largest state in the United States of America. And none of the 5 cities have said they're going to disobey the law. And if they do disobey the law, I think there are legal ramifications, and I think there are also political ramifications, and maybe down the road financial ramifications.
The poll numbers for the primary were quite one-sided heading into today. According to the most recent public policy polling, he was leading Republican Charles Moss by 63 percentage points. Gary Grumbach, Elon Local News.
McCrory isn't the only candidate running for governor. Roy Cooper is looking to take his spot. Roy Cooper, currently serving as the Attorney General, was born and bred in North Carolina. As the state's top law enforcement official, Cooper has cracked down on crime in the state and worked to increase penalties for those who do break the law. Previously, while he was in the North Carolina House, he wrote the first children's health insurance initiative for North Carolina. As Governor Cooper is hoping to improve health care, jobs, the economy, and education.
Governor McCrory isn't the only candidate looking for re-election this March. Senator Richard Burr is looking to hold onto his Senate seat for another 2 years. Richard Burr is currently serving his second term on the Senate for North Carolina. Burr was first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1994 and has since served as the chairman of the U.S. Committee on Intelligence to provide safety for families. Burr has been a longtime advocate of military veterans and their families, making this as well as national security some of his main issues.
Here's some of the local updates for you. Governor McCrory has 77% against C. Robert Brawley at 17% of the vote. Senate update for the Republicans is Richard Burr with 63% and Greg Brandon with 24%. On the Democratic side, Deborah Ross has 64%.
Thanks for joining us for this special edition of Elon Local News.
Continue following Elon Local News on social media for all your election updates.
We will be live on air tomorrow night at 6 p.m. on WSOE 89.3 and right back here in the studio on Thursday morning at 9:50.
Have a great night, Elon.